Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Free TFOS, where I take stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called 80 Proof, written by NarodnayaToast.
Come on, try it, it's great.
The human hollered this across the table, their legs like jelly, as they stood up and staggered their way round the ambassador opposite. They then leaned over, placing both elbows squarely on the table, inches from the ambassador's plate.
"Please don't shout,"
the Vale's ambassador replied.
"You are attracting the attention of others."
It was true. Several others in the eatery had turned their heads, or their species equivalent, though some, upon realizing who had just shouted, sighed and turned back to their meals, content in the knowledge that it was simply a human having a little bit too much fun.
"Ah, Ricky, don't be like that. Just once, please, for me."
The human made a face that was probably supposed to look cute, but to Ricky it looked more as if they had sat on something squishy.
"Alex,"
Ricky replied,
"I would, to put as you humans do, rather die than try your poison. I will continue with my meal now."
He made a show of stabbing a vegetable on the plate with his fork and raising it to his mouth, ignoring Alex's protests and attempts to grab his attention. Eventually, Alex gave up, huffing as he wobbled back to his chair and sat down. As he did, Ricky could hear him muttering, something about being a spoil sport and another about alcohol only being a poison if you drank a vat of it. Humans are so strange, Ricky thought, as he chewed his next bite of food. Ricky had been tolerating Alex's behavior in this vein for several days now. He would have put a stop to it some time ago, if it were not for the fact that Alex was excellent at his job and had what seemed a sixth sense for danger. He drank to excess only when he was certain the area was secure. Ricky was also, though he was loath to admit it, amused by how casual Alex was around him. It served as a form of perverse entertainment during days which dragged on too long. The meal continued and finished without incident. Ricky and the now very drunk Alex made their way back to their accommodation for the evening. It was dark. Mandated blackout left the streets empty, but Ricky carried a lantern dimmed to almost nothing to find their way. For once, the ash clouds from the firebombings did not obscure the sky. Ricky had taken a few steps before he realized that he was by himself. He looked back and saw Alex frozen, face looking up at the sky, mouth opened, a hand raised as if he caressed the pinpricks of light above. The pale glow of his lantern illuminated his face. He was enraptured by the stars, and the look of peace and contentment in his eyes was a surprise to Ricky, to the point where he did not interrupt, instead letting Alex stand for several seconds before he came back to his senses and stumbled over to where he could see the second lantern waiting. Ricky did not bring up the episode until a few days later. In the next town over, after another event where a Vale's ambassador and their guide were required. This time the two ate bread in their accommodation. They had bought this from a merchant in between the towns. Knowing that the local eateries here would be closed, food rationing had hit such businesses hard. Ricky swallowed a piece of dry loaf.
"Alex,"
he said.
"Yeah?"
Alex was not facing him. The two were sitting on their beds, Alex keeping an eye on the window, Ricky staring at the wall on the opposite side.
3 nights ago, when you were drunk again, you stopped to look at the stars. Why?"
"I don't know," came the reply. "Don't remember well. I guess they just look pretty."
Ricky pressed him further.
"I've never seen you so calm. Was it anything in particular?"
"Dude, stop. I'm not in the mood for questions."
Alex sighed and spared a glance to the flask sitting on the table, but his eyes flicked back to the window a second later, and he continued to study the darkness outside. Ricky chose to say nothing. After a silence lasting a few minutes, Alex relented.
"They remind me of home."
He spoke more softly this time.
"Do you ever look up to the stars as a kid?"
"Not really,"
Ricky replied.
"On my homeworld, they were not visible most days. I tend to forget they existed."
"Why, it's a shame."
Alex reached for his flask, flicking off the cap and taking a sip, eyes not leaving the window as he did.
"You know, I thought you Vales were all annoying and diplomatic, but you're all right. You don't annoy me."
"I will take that as a compliment."
Alex blew air from his nose in amusement at that response, and after a pause he spoke again.
"Tell you what, Once we're done with this mission, I'll show you a place I know in this world, by the sea." He took a large gulp from the flask. "The stars shine even brighter there."
"I would like that."
Ricky turned to look at Alex. He saw the flask in one hand and sighed to himself, but said nothing more. The third town they visited 6 days later was half destroyed by artillery. There was a ceasefire in place, though it was as fragile as paper. The two opted to sleep out of town after the events of the day, and they camped in a nearby forest where the trees had trunks to the sky and leaves to the ground. Alex had found a tree with the inside hollowed out. It was large enough to fit 2 people. They ate their rations in silence, their lanterns dimmed as much as possible. Alex stood as he ate, a rifle within arm's reach. For now, his flask remained full. Alex was the first to speak after the meal. He whispered, his voice going no further than the leaves outside. "Aren't you scared, Ricky, doing all of this? Hiding from armies and assassins who don't want peace? Your missions are usually less and, well, dangerous, right?" A short silence, then Ricky's reply, his voice quieter than Alex's.
"I am scared, yes. But the fear is nothing, not compared to those suffering because of this war. They need me out here, and I need you out here too.
Wish they'd just send a droid."
You know that the region of the 4 towns does not deal with such technologies. It is an in-person or not at all."
Alex opened his mouth to whisper a reply, but the sound of footsteps, small branches breaking, and rustling leaves came first. Ricky froze, wide-eyed in terror, hardly daring to breathe in case it was too loud. In a blink, the rifle was in Alex's hands, and he pointed at the end of the barrel towards the entrance, finger pressing against the side of the trigger guard. A bullet already chambered and ready to fire. Ricky reached for the lanterns and switched them off. The footsteps passed by the tree, pausing for a moment that stretched into eternity, then continued, fading into the distance. The two waited around 20 minutes before moving or speaking again.
"Alex,"
Ricky's whisper could barely be heard over the rustling of leaves. Alex turned his head a little to listen, though the majority of his attention was still to the outside, listening for more footsteps.
"Does drinking help you relax?"
"Mm-hmm."
"Can I try some?"
Surprised, Alex glanced over, though he could not see Ricky in the oppressive gloom. Sure." Setting the rifle down for a moment, he pulled out a flask from his back pocket. Taking a swig, he then stretched his arms out in the direction of Ricky, flask in hand. "It's in my hand if you reach out. Don't damn well drop it or you're not getting any more." He felt the flask being plucked from his grasp, followed by a glug, a quiet gasp, and then silence for several minutes. Then a small voice,
"This poison tastes terrible, but I do feel more relaxed."
The fourth and last town on the other side of the forest was gone, razed to the ground, and a sea of tents greeted Alex and Ricky as they walked the dusty streets. Citizens and refugees of all species peered from the tents, watching them. They seemed more curious than anything else. In the evening, a banquet was held under the largest tent, held to celebrate the completed and signed treaty of the 4 towns. The food was not of high quality. It had been prepared with love, however, and Alex and Ricky sat on the ground together, enjoying the meal and, for the first time in weeks, the feeling of safety. Ricky had decided to try a glass of homebrew wine. He was doing his best to remain composed. He couldn't help but giggle, however, at something said by the town's leader, and Alex had to move the glass out of arm's reach and then elbow Ricky to get him to quiet down. Alex himself drank from his flask, as always. Luckily, the tent was loud, and the leader did not notice the giggle.
"Hey, Alex,"
Ricky was, for once, Alex noted, a little less uptight. "Yeah?"
"What's in that stuff you drink? It's strong."
"It's rum."
A rare smile came across Alex's face.
"Mixed with a few different kinds together. I call it 80 proof.
"What's that mean?"
Ricky, a little flushed, was speaking with less care than usual.
"Don't know. Some really old human phrase I saw in a book once. I think it was used as a measure of how strong it is."
Alex took a bite of food and chewed.
"Another question. I have another question."
"Mm-hmm."
"The place you mentioned is nearby, right? Can we go see it? The stars?"
Alex swallowed a bite of food.
"Sure. Tomorrow."
Ricky grinned. Later, under the light of the stars and dozens of lanterns, they all danced. The music was raucous, and the beating of drums shook the bones of all nearby. Ricky, floating around on a haze of alcohol, moving from one place to another without thought, felt as if reality finally made sense in some strange daze. A unified theory of everything fueled by wine that he'd once thought poison. Alex, laughing as he would never stop, spun Ricky around and around until they both fell over, and where their hands touched, it felt like fire. It felt like fire, and the haze was like lava, and all of Ricky's reservations melted in their combined wake. And then the two began to talk, some of it nonsense, but some of it profound. As they drank some more, Ricky reached for his hand again for more dose of that fire, but this time it didn't stop when Alex let go as he stumbled over the tent pole and almost fell over.
So this is why the humans drink alcohol,
Ricky thought, as his memories transformed from movies to slideshows of photos, and Alex's laughter rang in his ears until he could hear nothing else. It was long past bedtime, and everybody was asleep. The serenity of night was shattered by the gunfire. Shouting and screams followed. Alex started awake, removing one arm that had draped around the sleeping form of Ricky, and jumped to his feet. "Ricky, up, now!" He gave Ricky a kick in the leg for good measure, and made a grab for his rifle. Ricky ran from a deep sleep to on his feet in seconds.
Who? What? Where?
His head hurt a little. His reaction times were slowed. "Evacuation protocol." The code word sent Ricky into a flurry, grabbing his backpack with his precious cargo inside. Alex stepped towards the entrance, closed his eyes, and concentrated. Within seconds, he was able to tell roughly the number of attackers and the direction from which they had entered the town. He opened his eyes again. "This way," he whispered to Ricky, who could just about see where he was pointing to. "I reckon around 20 of them. Follow me. Do not say anything unless it's life-threatening not to. And keep that damn treaty safe. Whoever is attacking probably wants to destroy it." The two crept out of their tent, lanterns in hand, but switched off. Luckily, their eyes had adjusted to the dark, and Alex had already memorized the evacuation route. They were well hidden from pursuers. However, as they crept across the tent city, they had to stop in places to stay hidden from the flashes of light made by lanterns being switched to full. Alex grabbed Ricky's hand as they moved, to make sure that he didn't fall behind, he thought. Although the fizz he'd felt from where the human and veiled fingers interlocked indicated that this was not the only reason. Sporadic gunfire and more screams echoed in the distance. They started to hear footsteps, faint at first, then louder and louder, coming from all directions. And then the occasional thump of a body hitting the ground amongst intensifying gunfire. At least the tent began to thin, and the shadowy giants of the trees loomed out of the darkness. Alex squeezed Ricky's hand twice as a signal to stop, then looked back. He could see little, but he could smell smoke, and hear still the distant footsteps and gunfire. Looking forward again, there was a clearing. He guessed it would be around 100 meters to the tree line. Then the footsteps from behind suddenly grew louder, and above it all, someone began to shout. "This way!" The yell soared over the sounds of fighting. "They weren't in their tent. They're all trying to get to the forest. Shoot them!" "Ricky, run!" Alex spared a glance to where Ricky was standing as he spoke. Ricky was frozen in place, terrified. "Move! The treaty! Go!" Alex began to run, pulling on the hand until Ricky defrosted a little and started to run also, and their hands separated as they sprinted across the clearing together. Bullets zinged by them. Several figures had reached the edge of the tent city and were firing upon the two with rifles, although they were struggling to hit the two fast-moving figures in the dark. One of the pursuers started forward as if to give chase, but another grabbed their shoulder and yanked them back, as they knew that at night they were as likely to be shot as those they were chasing. Throughout, the echoing screams from before continued unabated. Alex slowed a little. He allowed Ricky to run ahead of him, ensuring that his body shielded Ricky's from the hail of fire. By the tents, the group's leader kneeled, then took aim with the hunting rifle. This one, unlike the others, had night vision scope attached. Such an item was illegal here, punishable by death. The leader steadied his breath, breathed in, breathed out, slowly letting the crosshair settle on his target. He fired. The bullet grazed Alex's shoulder, and he grunted in pain, but kept running. Ricky reached the trees first and dove behind a particularly large tree, hitting the ground and staying prone. Alex followed suit, though instead of lying prone also, he dropped into a kneeling position, hoisting the rifle to his shoulder and adjusting the sights for the distance. He leaned to the left a little, checked with his ears that nobody had tried to cross the clearing, and aimed at one of the pursuers who were illuminated by their lantern. He took 2 large breaths to steady himself, then he fired. His shoulder yelped from the movement and the recoil. In the distance, the figure fell. He reloaded, took aim once more, and fired. This shot seemed to hit the next figure, although this time they did not fall. The pursuers' lanterns started to blink out as they realized they had made themselves obvious targets. The leader of the pursuers, having reloaded his hunting rifle and found the source of Alex's bullets, took aim once more. In the background, those who lived in the tent city, armed with their own rifles, had now engaged his group, and he could hear the last of them shouting to each other, the crack of bullets, and the thump of bodies. He had one chance left to destroy all the treaty stood for before the city killed him too. He took one last breath and fired. Seconds later, he was felled by a hail of bullets. The shouts of triumph from the tent city defenders echoed in the forest. Ricky got to his feet and leaned against the tree, panting, still trying to catch his breath. Alex was holding a hand to his chest. He removed the hand. It came back red. Ricky switched on the lantern, then gasped.
Alex, your chest, are you hurt?
Oh, yeah. Think one of the bullets grazed the side. Hang on, I'll patch it up.
But as he lifted his shirt, it was clear it was not a graze. Dark liquid spooled at a terrifying rate from where the bullet had pierced him. His burst of adrenaline began to fade, and as he began to tilt to one side, Ricky ran forwards and grabbed his shoulders to steady him. He then pushed down on his shoulders, forcing him to sit.
Alex! Alex! Alex!
Ricky's voice became more panicked with every word. Alex tried to respond, but Ricky cut him off.
No, this wasn't supposed to happen. Oh, God. Oh, hell. I can fix this. I don't have the training. I need to stop the blood somehow.
He continued to babble as he tore a length of fabric from his shirt and pressed it onto the wound.
Ricky,
Alex wheezed as he spoke. Shh, it's fine. He placed a hand over Ricky's and gently lifted it away from his chest. The fabric was already sodden with red. The bullet had torn through an artery.
Like hell it is, Alex. You're bleeding out. Your hand is cold. I can't. What do I do? Do I run back to get help? Do I stay? I don't know what.
As Ricky's words trailed off into incoherence, Alex reached into his back pocket with his other hand and pulled out the flask. He felt sluggish and cold, but he was able to pop the cap and take a sip before offering it to Ricky.
Here, take it, he wheezed. Keep it.
The words took more effort to say than before.
What?
Ricky felt tears in his eyes. He could see that Alex was fighting unconsciousness.
Keep it. I'm not going to make it out of here.
Ricky's tears flowed freely now.
No, please don't say that. Don't go. Don't go.
He squeezed Alex's hand far too tightly. But he didn't care. All he cared about was this moment holding on to Alex's hands. Alex weakly squeezed it in return, then spoke again, the words fainter this time.
Drink it when you're sad or happy, I don't know. Humans drink for all sorts of reasons.
He coughed, and his lips became stained with red.
80 proof, yeah?
A smile on his eyes sparkled as they met Ricky's.
Remember, it's probably important or something.
And then he let out the last of his breath and collapsed to the dirt floor. And Ricky screamed in anguish as he tried and failed to revive the fallen human. 2 months later, the stars were brighter than anywhere else Ricky had seen. He walked along the beach, feet sinking a little onto the sand, the gentle swish of the sea accompanying him on his walk. In one hand, he held his lantern. In the other, he held Alex's flask. He turned it over in his hand, noticing how Alex's bloody fingerprints still remained. He could even see the scratches and dents from where it had been dropped. How was it possible for one person to leave such an impression after they were gone? It felt as if everything Alex had done and said revolved around this one tiny item.
Humans are really strange, he thought. They were rude and brash at times, and they sometimes did and said things without regard for others. But they were also tender and cared for those around them. And Alex, on his final day, had shown the second side of himself to Ricky. Ricky raised the flask to his lips. He took a sip, certainly not the first of the night, letting the buzz of the alcohol permeate his mind and body. He felt as if he was not quite in his own body as he walked, one step after another, across the place in which Alex should have been in step with him. If he had been here, he would have been laughing and smiling as he drank from his flask. Maybe he would have been looking at Ricky with that sparkle in his eyes. Then Ricky stopped and looked up, and for the first time truly saw the stars. They were endless and twinkling, unobscured by ash. There would be no more artifacts of war to disturb the sky. Not anymore. The mission was complete. But Ricky wished he could reverse time to the day of the signing of the treaty, just for one last day with Alex, one last drink, and one last dance. Ricky dropped the lantern and raised an arm to the sky, caressing the stars. He felt a longing, small at first and intensifying until it felt like it could choke him, for a home he could not see from here, and for someone he had grown to love that he could not speak to. He stood for what seemed like forever, frozen, enraptured by the vista of twinkling above. He whispered to them, "Alex, wherever you are, hope to see you again someday. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to understand you better. Thank you for telling me about this place." The flask fell from his fingers, landing in the sand next to the lantern as Ricky continued to gaze upwards. On one side, Ricky had carved 2 words into the metal. They shone from the light of the lantern. 80 proof. End of story.
I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Drexzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.